Well, it's been officially a year since I recorded the last episode of my memoirs, journaling, and a lot's happened. Bought a house with my wife, had kids with my wife, twins. They were just born. And every time I thought about sitting down to do another kind of voice memo or journaling, it really brought a lot of pain for me, just because I was going through a lot of transition. But I think before having the twins, I was really struggling with my self-image as a composer, as a husband, as a man, as a composer, musician, friend. And I masked a lot of that with alcohol, as I kind of usually tend to do. And since having the twins, it's really opened my eyes to more of my dependence on alcohol, that having babies, feeding every 2-3 hours, keeping them alive, but also just being present and bonding with them as their dad, really opened my eyes to how alcohol can be another lover, another child that you kind of harbor and try to protect. And so what my heart has done is slowly weaned off of alcohol, but also rejected it. It's not my child. It's not my lover. I'm breaking up with alcohol, so to speak. And my relationship will be forever changed. And I don't know if it's sad that it took having twins to realize that, took having kids to realize that. But it happened, and I think I'm better for it. And with that said, 3 weeks into having twins has helped me kind of not ignore the pain or ignore the growing pains of identity crisis, but it's helped me to accept it, I guess, maybe, and to move on, really. Not forgive and forget, but forgive and move on. And with that said, I'm happy to look through my memories, because it's a cliche, but having twins changes you. Having kids changes you. And so I'm ready to dive headlong back into creating, into making music, into podcasting myself, my creative endeavors, and working at that as well as with my other work as a financial consultant, which is also weird. Totally put that on the sideline. Didn't realize how much of that would cause an identity crisis, but that's for another time, I guess. When I look back on 2015, where I left off was coming back from Italy after a festival in 2014. I'm starting my master's work at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And it was just a complete new adventure. And I think about all my friends that I kind of left behind. A lot of them were at Murray State. I finished in 4 years, and a lot of them had to do a 5th year, at least in music, but then maybe in otherwise. And it was the first. I'm looking back. I'm realizing for the first time just trying to empathize with how they felt with a friend leaving and moving on to a new chapter, especially growing up in Murray, living there for most of your life from age 6 to age 21. I underestimated, and I up until recently, I underestimated how significant it was to leave, and to not only leave behind a place, leave behind family, but also to leave those friends. And that's just the course of life. I can't apologize for it, but I can empathize with them to try to understand how it feels to be left behind, essentially. Which is a little dramatic, but there's still something there. And I'm glad I left, but I'm also, a part of me wishes I could have stayed forever. But I don't know if that's codependence or something for another tale. So leaving behind Murray, I moved into my first apartment by myself. I had been in the dorms up until then, kind of independently, but never had like an apartment. I had a full assistantship with a stipend. I was given, probably $600 a month, maybe $1,000. I can't remember. It was just pennies on the dollar, and it was enough to basically pay the rent and maybe a little bit for food. And it really taught me some money management, taught me to be scrappy for the first time. My parents helped me out. Because I was able to pay through college, they had money left behind to send for any kind of supplemental food. That wasn't much either. It was like probably $1,000 or $2,000 at the start of the semester, and I had to make that last. Maybe $500. I can't remember. I'll have to look at my bank statements way back then. But it's just kind of crazy to me that how when you're young you make things work. And so I arrived at Greensboro, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. I felt very accomplished for going to a festival and composing. I felt very artistic, that I was going to school for composition. So when I went to Murray State, started my bachelor's when I was 18, I felt for the first time like, oh, I get to study this for a living. And just so passionate, so excited. Such a privilege, such an honor. I did not take it for granted after being pushed by my parents to go into like a technical career, like engineering or being a doctor or medicine. And so I felt that weight off my shoulders and just excitement to study what I wanted. And then even going to my master's, it was like, whoa, I really get to study what I want. Because music ed was kind of a means to an end. It's like all my education classes I look back on and I think, man, this is like not a waste of time, but just, man, I really don't want to be doing this. I do not want to be a teacher. This is really boring, or this is like trivial. This is really like rudimentary, essentially, especially like imagining your classmates as kindergartners. And being able to study composition for the first time was just mind-blowing to me, because I was like, wow, like all of my classes, all of my studies revolve around writing music, talking about writing music, creating music. And when I was in my bachelor's, again, it was like the side gig. It was the second most important, or third most important. It was like first most important was like getting out on time. Second most important was my saxophone studies, to be a really great saxophonist. And then third was to be a good composer. And so I'd won these awards. I went to this festival, got accepted. My music was taken off, and I think at that point in 2015 my piano piece was accepted for a call for scores, and I was just getting a lot of success and a lot of traction, even though back then I remember feeling like it wasn't working already because I wasn't rolling in the dough. But like looking back, man, to just submit to things, and even though I didn't get into a lot of those things, I got into a lot of stuff. I got accepted to a lot of call for scores, got accepted to a lot of festivals, like a lot of stuff that I really, again, took for granted. And maybe that's just hindsight. Maybe that's just looking back and reflecting on it and journaling. But I was really fascinated by computer music when I arrived at Greensboro. I had a professor, Brian Sayak, who wrote really cool computer music, and I just remember I wanted to copy it. I wanted to learn how to do what he did with his computer music. And I began to learn a lot of different techniques with Mark Engebretson and my friends, my colleagues. Some of them, like Kate Wagner, who's now this amazing journalist and architectural critic. She was a musician first, but now she's doing way better things, and she can do whatever she wants. She's that good. She, brought in some techniques too. She's just wicked smart people I was surrounded by, and they were undergrads too, and I just really opened my eye. That also opened my eyes to how location makes a big difference in terms of who goes where and who you're surrounded by. It was just amazing to me how many intelligent people there were, and it opened my eyes to how little I was, I guess. But I still had a pretty big head of just like, I know what I know, and the confidence, and but also the humility to say, hey, I'm willing to learn too. Anyway, that's a different tangent. So going back to computer music, I learned a lot of different techniques, and for the first time, I think I took electronic music like the very first semester, and I don't want to say what a waste, because eventually I wrote better music later on. So it was definitely worth it, but I'm always wondering, man, what if I waited to take it a year later? But no, I think that wasn't the right way for me, because I needed to write really bad music. I wrote this saxophone and tape piece called I think it was like Prayer or something like that. I can't remember, but at that time in 2014, 2015, that fall and winter of 2014, the fallout of Mark Driscoll had really collapsed, and Mars Hill began to just die. And a lot was revealed about how misogynistic he was, how ruthless he kind of was as a leader back then. God knows where he is now. I think I've heard he's doing better as a leader. But anyway, I want to take samples of him being angry on stage and put that through the music, and then having some sort of hope narrative. It was really bad, and I cringe when I think back on it. But I needed to learn I needed that piece. I needed to do that to learn how to navigate Logic Pro, to navigate these different techniques of music, like slicing and chopping and editing and sound effects and panning and all that stuff, all that fascinating stuff. Because when I was in Murray, before I arrived there, I messed with Logic a considerable amount, especially composing for the soundtrack of Lazy. And I learned about panning and sound and surround, but in Greensboro, I learned about surround sound and different dimensions and different effects and different meanings behind the software. And I don't even think Logic Pro 10 had come out. I think it was like Logic Pro 8, and it was like really antiquated. If you could see it now, it just looked like it was in the mid-2000s, mid-2010s. And that's definitely an aesthetic that was back then, the 2010s. And nowadays everything is just like more minimalistic, more simple, more colorful. And I think the 2020s are characterized by just vibrant color, full on unashamed color. And I think back in 2010s it was like more like palettes and soft colors, muted colors. And so yeah, 2014 and 2015 I wrote a lot of crappy music. And I think last episode I talked about Blue Blood Sky. That was like my first kind of good piece that I wrote while I was at Greensboro, one I didn't regret. And that one I just embraced the influences I had of video games, of Kingdom Hearts, of emo rock music, simple chord progressions, and I just really embraced that. And the winter of 2015, so like this is like the spring of 2015, I guess. So January 2015, February 2015, a big snowstorm hit Greensboro, and I think the semester before, no, it was that semester. We had friends over. Everyone brought beer, and I remember everyone leaving their beer behind. It was for the laptop orchestra. That's right. What we would probably call electronic music 201 or 202 or 102, the second kind of edition of electronic music. And we had this ensemble, and it was like probably 6 to 8 people, and we all messed around with Max, and we made pieces for computer orchestra. And if I was kind of the most ahead of the curve, that was bad news. I mean, there were other people that knew what they were doing in Max, but it was just kind of like a free-for-all, a little lab, so to speak, of experimentation. Somewhat guided by Dr. Engebretson, but it was really self-guided. We had to figure things out on our own. And I had folks over at our apartment to mess around with the Wiimotes, trying to get them connected and messing around with the sound and doing different things. It was so much fun. It was so much fun discovering it. We had pizza and beer. And I just remember everyone leaving, and I think as a gesture as to and just having like kind of a thanks for having us over, everyone left their beer. And that's when I really first started wrestling with alcoholism, because I was like, oh cool, all this beer. And I think I put it in my room. I don't even think I put it all in the fridge, which was the first cue of like, whoa. And I started drinking it. And the more I drank, I noticed how the better I felt. And especially like relaxing on the weekend, I started watching this anime called Anohana. Great anime, very emotional. My kind of tier of anime. And I remember watching it and drinking the beer and just feeling generally good. All those dopamines hits, all that serotonin, all the chemicals in my brain, just feeling really good watching this show. And then sleeping the next day, just sleeping really well. Well, the last few beers I had of that night, a couple days later, I had the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and the computer orchestra was meeting the next morning. We met at like 8 a.m., maybe 7 a.m. And we met super early. I remember even Dr. Engebretson, like, because he's on college professor schedule of like getting to the university at 9:30, which was mind-blowing to me, because as a music ed student the year before, I was getting up at 6 a.m. for my for these ridiculous 8 a.m. classes that met Monday through Friday every single day of the week. And then student teaching, you have to wake up at like 6 a.m. to go to commute and then go do your student teaching that whole day. So I thought I was invincible, and I thought nothing of it. And I just remember drinking like 4 Sierra Nevada IPAs, maybe 5, and just puking my guts out. And I remember my roommate, I don't think my roommate was in town at that time. So I had the apartment to myself, and I just remember, man, it would be awful. It would be so embarrassing if I just like vomited. So I just vomited all the alcohol, and he would be around to like see me in this embarrassing moment. I went to bed miserable. I woke up even more miserable. I remember my very first, like baby's first hangover, and just messing around. I just remember thinking also, oh my gosh, I'm around tens of thousands worth of audio equipment, and I'm feeling like I'm about to throw up any second, and I'm holding back all my vomit. But I got through it and recovered. And I just remember that kind of marked my first experience with alcohol abuse, using it to affect my emotions, my state of being. Let's see, what else happened in 2015? I went to the New Year's conference, which was this Christian organization called Campus Outreach. They had this conference called New Year's Conference that basically every New Year's, it's a big evangelism event. Gospel is presented, Bible studies, breakout sessions, lots of fun. And we went to DC, and I didn't have fun, mostly because I was, my heart was really lukewarm to Christ at that time. B, I didn't have many friends in the organization. I felt kind of left out, whether on my own accord or otherwise. And C, I had to study for this big exam. It was like a screening, I think, maybe it was like a history screening, and I think I ended up failing that too, so I had to like take a supplemental. No, I think I passed it. I can't remember. I did well enough, or nothing came of it, but I was just miserable during the whole conference. And I think it was just because at that time, as a believer, I was still getting my footing. I wasn't totally abandoning Christ. I was going to a church. I was trying to go Campus Outreach, seeking community, but my heart had other plans, and my heart was still wandering around. I wasn't fully dedicated to the cause of Christ. and his things. I wasn't fully mature. I was very emotionally immature. So I just remember wanting things that weren't Jesus, that weren't God. And all my colleagues, I'm looking back, they were on fire for Christ. They loved the Lord. They love God. They want to serve God. And I was there and I was just like, yeah, I've been a Christian my whole life and I know what it's like to have a born again experience, and I've been through the thick of it, and I've had codependent sex, and I've had bad porn addiction, so I've been through it all. And I really thought that my poop didn't stink. And I wanted things, and not, instead of wanting God and Jesus and the Lord at that time like I do now, I wanted fame, I wanted pleasure, I wanted a girlfriend. I was a hopeless romantic. I wanted to find a mate. And I wanted things my way too. I remember being very grouchy to my hotel mates. I remember, not my hotel mates, my friends, Vincent and Matthew, and I just remember they wanted to do a devotional like super early, and I was just like, screw that, I want to sleep in. I just was really throwing a fit, and I was just like silent treatment, and I was just like really tired, and I wasn't in the mood. And I thought, you know, that would get across, but they pursued me, and I just remember looking back, I had such a bad attitude doing that little devotional that morning, and lots of regrets, but I've kind of forgiven myself, and I hope if those people, for whatever reason, listen to this, might forgive me. And so, New Year's conference, checked it off. I was composing Blue Blood Sky at that time. I had my MacBook, and I would have Finale open, and I would be doing that. I remember composing specific notes for that piece. And then returning back to school, I was studying with Stephen Bryant that year, and that was a lot of fun. He was a great teacher, a lot of notoriety. He wrote great music that he shared with me that I wanted to copy, and I may have said this in episodes before, but I really do believe that people get into composing because they hear a piece of music and they say, man, I should have written that. It's out of envy as opposed to maybe passion. It's not out of, I need to introduce music to the world. We oftentimes hear something and we're like, man, I should have made that. That was awesome. And it inspires you to kind of copy and do your own version of it and eventually find out. And that's not for everybody, but anyway. I wrote this percussion duo for these friends. I wrote a lot of music when I was in my master's, which is what you're supposed to do. And I wrote this percussion duo, and it was just awkward. I was kind of going off my metal and going off my metal phase and stuff like that. It just didn't work. And I think Dr. Engelbretson tried to show me some resources, but I was just kind of cheap and trying to do things his way and try to show my kind of allegiance to him, which I shouldn't have done. I should have just done things my way. And I think that's another reason why I was bad, just because I was trying to people please too much. I had the fear of man in me when I was composing that piece. And but I did write a couple pieces that I really loved, which were part of my personal prelude project. And at that time in YouTube was such an nascent age that it was kind of awkward. People were making money off of it, but it wasn't like this high production value deal now. It was a lot of indie vibes, a lot of independent creators, non-label, non-corporation kind of vibe. And I really loved it, and I wanted to kind of ride that and make my own way in YouTube. And so I made these videos, these short sketches, and like the personal prelude project videos, and like I bought a Canon camera. I used my iPhone and propped it up in places and shot video in 720p, sometimes 1080. You know, this is before 4K was really readily available and easy to maneuver, and transferring speeds were a lot slower. But I wrote a piece for Graham Dart and he plays clarinet, and I wrote a piece for Rachel Abuchon, and she was just killer. What a privilege to write for her, because she was a true virtuoso in every sense of the word, and she just like took my pieces and ran with them. She loved playing them, and I was just so honored that she played them so freaking well. And I hope I still have those recordings somewhere, but man, she knocked it out of the park. And what else? I ate lots of Jimmy John's with Ash, my best friend, during that time. He was in my wedding eventually. I learned how to do a lot of live sound in that time frame, and I did a lot of gigs. It was part of my assistantship, actually, and I remember a lot of late nights at the school, closing up shop, making sure everything was done right, repatching the hall. That's a memory, because as the live sound, you get to like customize the hall, but there was like this default setting that the staff at the university had, that when us in the electronic music department tried to change things, they always bugged us because it wasn't, the hall wasn't repatched after a night of doing custom live sound. So lots of last thing I do, remember, repatch the hall. I even remember, because I forgot to do it, I rode my bike back to the university. I had keys to the university, and I was able to do this. I don't think I had keys to the exterior, maybe. So I was like nervous that the university was locked. And I just remember biking at like 1:45 from my apartment all the way to the university in pitch black and traffic, and getting just in time to the university to repatch the hall and coming back and like drenched in sweat, because I think it was summertime in the middle of the South and North Carolina, humid like nothing else, and just coming home drenched with sweat, but at least I repatched the hall. And the beginning of the next year, I'm kind of bleeding into 2016, but I eventually got chosen to do the Composers Collage concert, which was a big honor because only one composer out of the whole studio in UNCG was chosen, and that was me. Dr. E wanted me to do my computer music piece, but I instead did this chamber piece that I had composed that in fall of 2015, and it was for saxophone, bass clarinet, and piano, and it was very like Charlie Parker influence, but also like very non-tonal chromatic exploration. It's called Don't Let Them Know, based on Secrets, and a little bit of Charlie Parker. And that was a huge honor to have that piece performed in front of probably like easily hundreds of people, because it was a big fundraiser, but it was a big kickoff to the year. So like a lot of new university students went to this concert, and it kind of represented each department in the music department, in the music college, the College of Music. So I got to represent the composition department, and they did a great performance. And I remember the ending being so lazy, and I think that's what Dr. E called it, because it was like very aleatoric and just kind of like a collapse and then over. But that was back when I had trouble ending pieces and I didn't know what I was composing. And toward the tail end of 2015, so this is going into my second year of my master's, I as well as being Sean, Amari, and Ash, we had to study for these comprehensive exams, and it was like 26 composers and over 100 pieces to write extensively about, and it was like very essay format and given a prompt and everything, and I failed it the first time, and then my professors just gave me a pass by, hey, just expand on it and take more time to like write a paper to prove to us that you understand what you're writing. It was so awkward. I think the whole assessment of it was also tricky, because it was like, what do you want us to do? I don't think the professors knew what they wanted. They just knew that what I provided wasn't passable, I guess, was like the most they could accurately assess. But from there, as far as like what they wanted, it was very confusing, because one professor wanted another thing, one professor wanted another thing, but it passed eventually, obviously. And that kind of leads to the pieces that I wrote. The ones that were good. I talked a lot about the pieces that were not good, but the ones that were good were a saxophone solo called "While It Was Raining in the Woods." Another one was called "Islands Torn and Seas." "While It Was Raining in the Woods" was probably my first breakout piece that got a lot of recognition from a lot of people. Because it was soloistic, it was electronic, it was also interactive. My first very interactive piece, because it was so exciting to me, because it was how I learned how to do live granulation. And that was such an exciting moment for me. And doing that in Max and then kind of conglomerating things was just such an exhilarating experience to do it not only accurately and correctly, but do it well and do it very good. And I made a score follow for it, got lots of views, got a lot of reactions, and it was very atmospheric. It was that granulation made it actually sound like it was what was described, raining in the woods, and the slap tongue of the soft muted slapping of the tongue on the saxophone really did sound like, and granulated, it sounded like rain. And I put a lot of atmospheric, soundscapey nature sounds in there, of wood sounds like bushes and sticks cracking and everything. And I submitted that piece for doctoral work, for festivals, and it got accepted in places. It was a lot of fun. It was my first piece as a composer performer, and that was nuts to me. It was also like I was watching PewDiePie, and a lot of these like choice-based games were coming out, and I wanted to make a piece. I still do want to make music that's based on choice, that it could go many different directions. Not a choose your own adventure, but more of like a butterfly effect of a piece. And where the music could take different directions, and depending on how you play the music and what you choose to play, the music would fork in the road. And that's something I need to explore, and I'm holding myself kind of accountable by talking about it here, but doing fork in the road music or butterfly music, where many different effects take different possibilities, essentially, where the music can divvy, and based on what you do, you have to play a certain passage. Good faith system, of course. And it was very emotional for me, because I think I was really into it, and I was really composing things how I wanted, and I felt for the total in tuneness with my composer self. Before, it was awkward. Before, I didn't know what I wanted. I just kind of copied people, but that was the first time that I deliberately composed and knew what I wanted. And same thing for the piece Island Torn and Seas. It's a euphonium tuba octet, and that involved electronics, but less interactive, more fixed. And that one, I use lots of granulation and soundscapes, but I just remember having a lot of fun, like being influenced by Steve Reich and New York Counterpoint and things like that. That it was a lot of fun to kind of break grounds for tuba euphonium, and got a lot of traction. Lots of people liked it, and I think for those two pieces, it made me at least reconsider. I wanted to reconsider the role of those two instruments, the euphonium tuba and then the saxophone. That a lot of the music was hokey, a lot of it was copying off the virtuosic. It was very kind of cookie cutter, fixed, and I wanted to kind of create my own style of it, my own way of thinking about it, because I played euphonium and I played saxophone. I wanted to write music that I wanted to play, and that was very liberating for me. So a lot happened in 2015 that if I didn't write that crappy music that I so reflected on and meditated on and kind of weighed on at the beginning of this kind of reflection, I wouldn't have been able to compose the really good pieces, that I wouldn't be who I am today because I kind of filtered them out and say, I never want to do that again. And I think as composers, we need that. We need to write a lot of crappy music because we need to point to something and say, I did that and I'm not proud of it and I never want to go there again. And as a result, I'm going to go on the other fork in the road. And I love forks in the road. I love that metaphor. So sorry if I beat that horse over and over. But I think there's so much power in knowing what you want. There's so much power in taking the other fork in the road. Once you've learned your lesson, not turning around and going back, but by choosing the other path. Continuing to go forward, but choosing the other path, knowing that at least it's not going to go the way I don't want to go. And with that said, enjoy While It Was Raining in the Woods.